when I talk to my friends, I'm a lay person, and when I talk to my other friends who are all lay people, it's obvious, very obvious to us that money is not free speech, that corporations are not persons. It's only to the ruling elite in this country that want to continue on with a two-party system, elitists down the road to, and which we're already in, which is fascism, to where the corporations are ruling us more and more. That's the reason we have the right to make a constitutional amendment, and I believe in the long run, anything less than that, it's just not going to work.
All right, thank you for that, Will. So, Ciara, we know that there are some groups out there trying to push for constitutional amendments. What would a constitutional amendment have to say if it were to do these things that you're talking about and that our callers are talking about, and what's the likelihood of it getting passed?
So in our U.S. Constitution, there's Article 5, which allows for amending the Constitution. Our Constitution has only been amended 27 times in our 200-plus year history. It is difficult to amend the Constitution. That was by design. It was not supposed to be amended on a whim. That being said, Citizens United definitely struck a nerve, and it invigorated a response, and one of those responses is the attempt to have a 28th Amendment which would address Citizens United. Now, there are various different versions of constitutional amendments that would address Citizens United. Some of them are very limited to that opinion, and then others go far more broad. So, for example, certain amendments would get rid of not just Citizens United, but would get rid of Buckley versus Vallejo, what we were talking about earlier, the idea that money is speech. And depending on which of these amendments is adopted, it would certainly generate a new slew of litigation where the country would have to figure out, okay, so we have this new amendment, how does this work in the real world? And the ultimate arbiter of that, of course, would be our good friends, the justices on the Supreme Court.
One of the pushes for amending the Constitution, you can find out about it at movetoamend.org. I'm not playing favorites, it just happens to be one of the easier ones to remember, movetoamend.org. So thank you for that call, Will. In Gibsonton, we have a text message from the 727 area code from Linda in Palm Harbor. Even without Citizens United, the influence of lobbyists and elected officials who come from corporations will still be immense, says Linda. So, what about that, even without Citizens United?
Yeah, lobbying is the other side of the coin if you're talking about money in politics. So there's the money that's spent in the election, and then there's the money spent lobbying. And the money that is spent lobbying tends to be, 100 to 1 bigger than the money that is spent in elections. And there are a number of reasons why that's the case. For one, an election is once every 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, depending on which office you're electing. Lobbying can happen every day, and so one of the ways that corporations have expanded their power over the course of American history is using that First Amendment right to petition the government to influence what legislation moves, what regulations are adopted at federal agencies, what happens at state agencies. All of that is done through lobbying dollars. So yes, that is an enormous power.
Thank you for that question, Linda. I want to ask you, Ciara, we talked earlier about Justice Alito, about the Roberts Court pushing for corporate rights, but there are some Supreme Court decisions that equivocate on corporate rights and corporate personhood. What are those decisions, and how do you see those as giving an opening for maybe this to reverse course?
Sure. So one of the few exceptions to the Supreme Court giving corporations unfettered rights is under the Comity Clause. So the Comity Clause is a part of the U.S. Constitution, And it basically says that a state can't give different rights to out-of-staters than it gives in-state citizens. And over the years, corporations have tried to use the comity clause the same way they tried to use the Equal Protection Clause.
And that's comedy with a T.
With a T, not a D. And the Supreme Court has, for all of its history, resisted the urge to extend comity clause protections to corporations. And one of the things that the Supreme Court says in those cases is corporations are not citizens for the purposes of the comity clause. And the reason that I think this is important is if we get a ninth justice to replace Justice Scalia, then that new ninth justice is going to have a lot of choices to make. There are choices to make in the corporate power cases. There are choices to make in the money and politics cases. And if a new justice wants to limit corporate power, then dusting off these comity clause cases is one of the ways where that justice can cite to precedent, which is actually longstanding, as a way to say, look, we've never recognized that corporations are full citizens, and thus and therefore we can do these things that limit corporate power.
Well, thank you so much for joining us at WMNS MidPoint today, Ciara.
Thank you for having me.
Ciara Torres-Spelliscy is an associate professor of at Stetson University College of Law in Gulfport. Her new book is called Corporate Citizen, An Argument for the Separation of Corporation and State. I want to thank everyone who called in and who emailed and texted today. I'm Seán. I'm the host of WMNF News MidPoint Monday. Tomorrow at noon, your hero Mark Bureau will host MidPoint Tuesday. And if you didn't get a chance to talk and you'd like to leave a voicemail with your thoughts, give me a call at 813-238-8001, extension 114, and I'll play your message next show. You can also join the conversation online at WMNF.org/news. You can join us on Facebook or Twitter at WMNF News. I want to thank our engineers James Rossi and Frank Knox. Stay tuned for more great music now, coming up with Flea on It's the Music. That's coming up right after NPR headlines on WMNF Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota. I want to thank everyone who has donated to WMNF. You can still make a contribution at WMNF.org or on our new app. Thanks for listening.